This Omicron surge is expected to get worse in the coming weeks. To talk more about the rapid spread and new quarantine guidelines is senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, Dr. Amish Adalja. Dr. Adalja, welcome back to Morning Rush. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So, Doctor, why did the CDC shorten quarantine guidelines to 5 days instead of 10? Do you think this helps or hinders the progress being made in the pandemic?
I think it helps the progress being made in the pandemic. We know that 10-day isolation period that had been in place since the beginning was a one-size-fits-all number. And what we've seen over the pandemic is a lot of understanding of the virus and when people are most contagious. And that last tail end of the isolation period is not when people are generally spreading the virus. We've seen this with lots of studies looking at the viral load and antigen tests. So I do think that this truncation makes sense scientifically. And with all of these mild breakthrough infections that are going to become ubiquitous, it becomes really important to have a way to minimize the disruption, and it's a science-based way to minimize the disruption. So I think this is more progress towards making COVID-19 something that we can deal with more like other respiratory viruses. I would like to see more testing involved in these decisions and maybe precision guiding that isolation period a little better. But in general, I think this is a good move and makes it a lot easier to be able to kind of navigate a world when COVID is ever present.
Well, you're right about that. I'm sure people hear this news and they have a lot of questions. Like you just mentioned, how important is it to first test negative if you have an infection? And how likely is it that someone could still be contagious after isolating for 5 days?
It's unlikely that they're going to be contagious for much longer than 5 days. Some individuals and thought that we could do a test at day 5 and then release somebody from isolation. Unfortunately, we probably don't have enough tests to be able to do that operationally. But I think in the guidance, it's not just that at day 5 you go about your life. You wear a mask when you're around other people, and your contagiousness is going to taper off. And I think that that's a good scientific grounds for decreasing isolation periods with masks as part of that tail end. I think you could even probably truncate it more or even make it more precision guided by checking whether or not somebody's antigen positive if you have an antigen test. So when you get to that 5-day period, if you've got a test handy, that would be one way to be sure. And I think you could also do it the other way around. If you're maybe on day 4 and you have no symptoms or you've been completely asymptomatic, that might be something you could also do. Eventually, I do think we will get to a point where these isolation periods are completely guided by tests, but I think that's probably more something that will happen when supplies increase significantly for these home tests.
Let's move on to cases in children, because we've seen these cases skyrocket during this surge. Why are we seeing such a spike? What's behind this?
The biggest reason to me is the fact that children are the least protected when it comes to COVID-19. They are the group that has the lowest vaccination rates, and if you're less than 5 years of age, you're not eligible to be vaccinated. So this virus is going to find people who are unvaccinated, and some of those individuals, even in the pediatric group, are going to have risk factors for hospitalization. Maybe they have asthma or have some lung disease, and they're going to get infected, especially when you see cases rising so fast. The virus is going to hit people who are unvaccinated and high risk, and that's usually older adults, but there are going to be some children that have those same risk factors, so like lung disease, that are going to be susceptible to infection. So the best way to get a handle on this is to get more children vaccinated and to get approval of the vaccine in that younger age group, which is going to come sometime later. But I do think we're going to find this virus is still going to prey on the unvaccinated. It is still going to hospitalize primarily the unvaccinated, and the pediatric age group is one in which vaccination rates are still suboptimal.
So, health experts keep saying to expect the situation to continue to get worse. We heard Dr. Anthony Fauci say that yesterday. How long can we expect this surge to last?
If you look at other countries that experience an Omicron surge, it seemed to come and go within a period of weeks versus months for Delta. So what we've seen is maybe 2 to 3 weeks of rising cases, and then Omicron kind of infects the people that it can infect, meaning those people that are out there doing things that put them at risk, and then it has a harder time finding susceptible hosts. This is something that needs to be borne out. We've seen it in other countries. Whether or not it can be completely extrapolated to the U.S. remains to be seen, but I would suspect that we're going to see cases rise for at least another week or so before we get some handle on it. It may not be uniform across the country. Maybe certain places that got hit with Omicron first, like New York City, will start to come down, while other places may take some time.
That would make a lot of sense. You know, right before we did this interview, we were reporting on a new study that shows that the virus can linger in the body for months after infecting your organs, like your heart or your brain. Is it normal for a virus to linger like this? And what does this new information tell us about the virus?
Most respiratory viruses come and go. They don't linger. But remember, in that study you mentioned, those were people who died of COVID-19. So that's a subset of people who have severe infection where the virus might have had the ability to disseminate to other organs. But we've seen this with other viruses that they can do this on rare occasions. The question is, how common is this? And is it linked with other symptoms like long COVID or other complications? I think these are preliminary findings, but we know that viruses can disseminate throughout the body and find places where they're kind of isolated away from the immune system. But we have to understand first how representative this is and how clinically relevant this is to the management of COVID or the understanding of long COVID. So it's going to take some time to unravel all of those mysteries.
Right. There's still so much we don't know at this point. Senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, Dr. Imesh Adalja, thank you so much for speaking with us here on Morning Rush. Good to see you.
Thanks.